Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to this session on where we'll be talking about the framework, the articulation, and everything in between for emotional intelligence. We have two extremely prestigious guests who've just joined us. We have Mr. Khurram Ellahi and Dr. Nirmal de Silva, all the way from Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us. We'll start with directly dig in to what EI is. My first question is that for a lot of individuals that probably are so equipped with IQ and getting their IQ sharpened up, how important is EQ in the real world, both in academics and the workplace? Khurram, if you could take that question.
I think Dr. is senior and he should take the start,
Okay.
Right. Ayubowan to everybody, and great to be on the show once again, Ali. Thank you for the opportunity. So it's an interesting topic, right? We've heard about the importance of emotional intelligence for leadership as well as from a workplace perspective. So if I get into a little bit more specifics with relevance to the question that you posed, I believe it's about yourself, and in terms of how you can control your emotions to be the best version of yourself. It's about not only trying to react to certain situations from a very myopic, self-centered perspective, but also to build relationships, understand the other perspective, and also to understand the distortions that you don't have control over, so that you can be more empathetic in terms of how you react and think. So from an academic perspective, I think your emotions matter a lot, because when it comes to academics, there is a lot of stress involved, whether it's an exam or whether it's completing your particular program. And at that point of time, you need to take stock of things, understand what's happening around, have confidence in your own self, and think rational, mainly. So I think that's from academic perspective. But when it comes to a corporate perspective, I think it's more about how you can deal best with others. Because end of the day, you can be the most smartest person in town, but end of the day, if you cannot manage relationships, if you can't understand others, and if you cannot be empathetic, you're definitely not going to be successful. So I think, Ali, from a nutshell perspective, that's the importance of emotional intelligence in today's context.
All right, Khurram, if you could shed some light on the question that I posed earlier.
Thank you so very much for inviting Greenwich University. Thank you, Dr. Saab, for joining from Sri Lanka. I hope you're having a good day. Actually, my zone of work is more of philosophy, and preferably I always wanted to read philosophy. But the much I know about the topic is the greatest tragedy in the human history is when Descartes wrote that I think, therefore I am. So since that day, since the explosion of science and since the plunder, let me record, plunder of industrialization, we had been removing emotions, and we have been bullying emotions in the mankind. We're telling them to calm down rather than we're not telling them to let your intelligence calm down. We have to ask them to calm your emotions. So in the last 100 years, specifically when the industrial age was growing, we just proposed emotions as something very negative in human beings, or more like very animalistic in mankind. But that's the upside down. Because I, Khurram Ellahi, I'm not an intelligent animal. I am an intelligent human being, and I don't qualify as a human being on my intelligence. And that's the most interesting part. No religion gives mankind superiority because they're intelligent. We give them superiority because they are emotional, they are human, they can cry. When in 21st century we're heading to a more digital world, we're having the competitors from the artificial intelligence. We are having algorithms which are competing with the human brains. I don't believe any brain could ever compete with the smartest or even a very primitive kind of a code which was established. And you know that in 1990s somewhere, the greatest of the chess players were losing to some of the softwares. And this is what I'm talking about 30 years back. So today, the artificial intelligence is moving ahead. But one thing that doesn't have artificial intelligence is emotions. As Dr. Sab said, in the corporate world, now what I look at is someone who is more empathetic, someone who understands mankind, someone who is more sympathetic, someone who understands why men cry, why people cry, why they get happy. And interestingly, Mr. Moderator, we don't live for intelligence. That's the greatest truth. We don't live for intelligence. Yes, we live to stay happy. And that's what we have eliminated from last 100 years. And this COVID situation has unveiled mankind that we had been walking the wrong path of intelligence. Maybe Gautam Buddha, how expressively he wrote about that. Maybe it was Allama Muhammad Iqbal. And just taking one more minute, if you ask Dr. Saab the religious legacy which he has, or if you ask me, or if I have to quote from Allama Iqbal or Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, or if we have to look at the life of the Jesus, all the great people we follow, we are not using their abilities to decipher our lives. We're using more capitalistic Machiavellian faculties to resolve our daily life. And the results are in front of us. 1% people are not yet fed wonderfully. Since the explosion of industrial age, when we have mighty giants raising their income levels, the answer is simple. Because we're using more intelligence than the more of emotion. That's from my side for this question.
All right, all right. Both of you mentioned a particular phrase, a particular term that's very important in the business world. I, as a trainer, feel that that's probably the pivots that quintessentially define how the human race will be moving forward. It's a buzzword for the last 10 years. And the word and the term that I'm referring to is empathy. Both of you talked about empathetic values and empathy. What exactly is empathy, and how can be used at the workplace or at a university when students are interacting with each other, or within their co-spaces, even their homes? How can empathy be really used? And the second part of the question is, how is empathy different from sympathy? Because a lot of people get confused there.
Yeah, it's a interesting thought, Ali. I think it's not only confusing to a certain degree, but it's also often misinterpreted as well. So I think from my perspective, when you look at empathy, let's take a small example of a university student. And at times, you might have sacrificed a lot and you want to get good grades. But suddenly you might have a friend or a batchmate who requires your support in terms of completing an assignment, and they might be emotionally drained and stressed out as a result of it. So you have one of two choices: helping the fellow student in terms of overcoming that barrier, or forgetting about that student and focusing on your studies and doing what you are supposed to do. Now, at most, if you do not study, you might lose a few marks in the final exam. But on the other hand, life is not all about passing exams. It's about building relationships. The emotional fulfillment that you get by helping one another is far more great than individual achievement. And on the other hand, if you look at from a sympathetic point of view, looking at sympathy, I think works well with the most vulnerable. So if there are people who are helpless and vulnerable, then you can be sympathetic. However, if you're on a more common ground, more than sympathy, I think what people requires is for you to understand them, putting yourself in their own shoes. And that's where empathy comes into place. Now, the issue is that how best can we control or differentiate an emotional scenario versus a rational scenario? And at this point of time, we live in a very, very competitive world. We live in a very VUCA-oriented, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous world. And in that scheme of things, we need people to be rational thinkers. We need them to take hold of their emotions. That doesn't mean that they cannot be emotional, because they are not machines. As humans, we are programmed to have emotions. And it's sometimes good to put out those emotions so that others can feel it. But at the end of the day, What is more important is not to make decisions purely based on emotions, but use those emotions in a manner so that you can create a more rationalistic approach to decision making.
All right, Khurram, if you could shed some light.
Yeah. So as Dr. said, in across the world, there's a word corporate social responsibility, and we dedicate 2% of our income minimum in Pakistan. That's the rule. So that's more like a sympathetic way where we feel for others, but we're not actually feeling for others. We know they're in the misery. We know they're bad, and some way down we do feel for them, but we're not putting that feeling into the right action, which is the empathy. So empathy is more like, okay, if they get hurt, so I get the tear. So that's the empathy. If they get hurt and I get a response, that is sympathy. And response is very natural. But being empathetic demands a more from your side. You actually have to maybe live away your comfort. You might have to you have to give away your happiness because someone else is terribly sad. You have to, as Dr. Sab said, you actually have to wear their shoes to understand their situation. And as you said, why in the corporate modern world we're talking about it? You might be We're getting some scary news about the next pandemic, and the next pandemic would not be from the health perspective, that would be from environmental perspective. And from that environmental perspective, again, all these corporations are held responsible for it. Mankind has changed the nature in last 50 years more than what we changed in last 5 million years. So we were sympathetic, we were giving away funds in the name of CSR for a better environment, of some petty campaigns we're doing for the environment, where we were not feeling for the environment the way we should have felt, and the result is in front of us. So sympathy is more reactive, more natural, but empathy demands a more prophetic attribute from you, that you would have to stay hungry until other doesn't get the food. You would walk an extra mile to help someone rather than staying in your shoes, staying comfortable. Yes, acknowledging the pain of the other person, but not putting an action or not giving a proper effort to your feeling for him or her. That's my take.
All right. The second question that comes to one's mind is that when we're referring to emotional intelligence as a key ingredient for human beings to exercise from tomorrow onwards, can this be measured? Can EQ be measured? Because the excellence of IQ stems from a measurement tool. It can be measured. There are techniques through which IQ can be labeled, and you're labeled as someone with a very high IQ, low IQ, and on the basis of that, you're selected for certain industries. Now, my question is, when you're working in areas like hospitality or financial services, can EQ be measured?
Yeah, so Ali, there is a lot of different schools of thought in terms of this whole subject of emotional intelligence and how to measure and how to train people to be more emotionally intelligent. But in my humble view, we should be focusing more in terms of how we can get people to understand their own emotions first. I think we need to be open about that, right? And then thereafter, in terms of showing them how your emotional intelligence can create impact. Because the end of the day, what matters the most is more than the responsibility part of it as individuals on how we can create positive environment, positive impact, whether it's the environment, whether it's the society in which we operate. And let me take a small example to exemplify this. You can be a corporate CEO, and during COVID-19, the lockdowns and the pandemic, most of even the large organizations took the decision to have job cuts as well as pay cuts. Now, for example, if you had no other choice and you decided to have pay cuts, as a CEO of a company, you need to lead from the front and take a pay cut. You can't get all your other staff and talk to them and tell them that we are going to have across the board pay cuts and you still enjoy all the perks. There's nothing be empathetic about it. There is no emotional intelligence there. That's downright selfishness. So if you are to lead from the front, I think your actions matter the most. So the challenge that I have, at least from this point of view of what has come through research on trying to measure EQ, my problem is that we're trying to put in a subtle benchmark, which is something that everybody might not be able to conform to, because different people act and react and think in different ways. Rather, if we can focus on trying to be the best version of ourselves and try to have a continuous improvement model, that seems to be more sustainable in the approach.
What would you say when I'm referring to measuring EQ? Do you think that can be measured?
I think I have some very organic friendship with the doctors out there. As number one, I'm how to express that. I don't believe in measuring. I'm a very hardcore anti-positivist, and I declare that openly. How could you measure emotions? I mean, that's very paradoxical questions. And secondly, just imagine the bias of the industrial age. Just imagine the bias of the people who wanted humans to be in a particular framework, the people who wanted certain archetype of mankind, uh, or certain moods of dehumanizing us. They termed it as emotional intelligence. Even in emotion, even to conceptualize emotions, they use the word intelligence. I mean, how betrayal that would be to the word emotion at principal place. Now, if you look into all religious discourses, if you look to all the success stories of the corporate world, if you look at all the success stories of the history, those who were emotional won the situation. They've been known in the history. They've been known in the history like anything. They have archived their footprints on the history. So primarily, when I read the word emotional intelligence, there is such a strong bias of the word intelligence that I'm using word intelligence to show the rationality of emotions, and that is out of my understanding. David Hume, one of the leading philosophers, said that reason can't motivate the will, but passions can. And David Hume went to the limit that he said that we live our whole life just to satisfy the emotions, and reason is just one of the little tools that we use to stay happy and to stay away from the fears. We don't want to be sad, so we're just using reason as one of the tools, and it is not an end. One of the great scholars who's writing like anything is Antonio Damasio, and he said that no one has ever lived for rationality or reason. We live for serenity, for happiness, for love. And none of these words qualify for the modern academic discourse because we're so obsessed about measuring everything. There is a strange book out in the market written by Philip Goff known as Galileo's Error. I recommend everyone to read that book. He said what science did is it chose an easy path, which was very basic, very simple, to just measure the visible world, just do the random tricks. The real us, which am I, who am I? Buali ye kehta aaya kidhar se hu, Rumi ye sochta hai jaun kidhar ko main. The real question, who am I and why am I thrown to the world, were discarded strategically so we can control the modern man as per the wills and wishes under certain frameworks. So coming back, you can never measure emotions, and even how could you measure a sea with a cup? So you'll be measuring cup times and times again. You're just obsessed to verify your particular scale, which you just have tested and run some statistical tools on it. You're nowhere near to the real essence of that word emotions. Principally, you can't. And the science is walking in like anything. The modern science, rather, is walking in like anything, that we can't measure everything. We're just trying to compare anything. And one such expensive thing Dr. Nirmal has said, and I don't know if our viewers has picked it up, that what would be the benchmark of that emotion? Do you want humans' emotions now to be standardized and we all become like bricks in a house? Do this tool of measuring emotions is what? Is it again like 8 hours, the way whole mankind leave their houses and go to the corporate giants to work for 8 hours and then we come back? Do you want that to be done to our emotions also? And who would identify that what is normal? Till date, psychology doesn't know what is normal. Yes, there are few modern powerful forces which define what is normal, and whole mankind has to stay in those limits to prove ourselves to be normal. What if I love my daughter more than anything? Tomorrow's modern scale would consider me mad and they would put me in the jail, the way they did with Friedrich William Nietzsche. So all hats off to Dr. Saab, the way he has highlighted that if you want to measure emotions tomorrow, you will normalize those emotions and you would put whole mankind in one basket, and then you would not have Homer, you would not have Shakespeare, you would not have Buddha, you would not have passions of Iqbal, and you would not have Maulana Rumi, because your sense of normalcy would be so generic. And people who would not fall into those brackets, you would call them mad. And another last reference I want to give to the students who are watching, Michel Foucault book, Madness and Civilization. It sheds light like anything on the idea what we are doing on the name or on the name of measuring everything, what we're doing with the, especially with the mankind.
All right. So very euphoratically quoted here, Khurram. Thank you very much for that. The second part is, we've talked about the physiological and the psychological and the philosophical impacts of EI. But on a day-to-day basis, when I talk about social skills, what kind of social skills do you think people need to possess to depict empathy at university, at the workplace? And the second part of the question relates to self-awareness. How do we find out whether we are empathetic, or do we have a very high emotional intelligence? Dr. Nirmal?
Yeah, Ali, I think it's a fantastic question that you asked. I think it sets the tone and the platform to something which is often not discussed in particular when it comes to the subject matter. When you look at self-awareness from my humble perspective, it's more about your self-evaluation. How do you rank your own self with certain elements or certain aspects of what life is all about? For example, are you a good listener? Are you a person who wants to always come on top, or are you a high achiever? What is your self-actualization needs? And as a result of that, are you trying to be the best at whatever you do at the expense of others? Or do you put in a high emphasis on relationships? And for that also, do you treat humans as an important element in your life, or a means for a transaction, or a means for an outcome? So I think it starts with a self-evaluation. More often than not, we try to evaluate ourselves in comparison to others. But if we start really looking at ourselves on how we can be better than what we were yesterday, then it will give us a deep understanding of who we are. Of course, it can be based on some acceptable norms. However, more than the norms, what matters is what is the impact that you can create, as I exemplified earlier. And then on the other hand, the social skills, right? Because it's also about the soft skills. More often than not, majority of the undergraduate students are very focused on the technical skills required for them to get a job and to succeed in their career pathway. But what they do not realize is that if you do not have proper social skills, if you do not have the proper soft skills, you can't actually succeed in the workplace. Let me give you a very simple example. When I got into the corporate world as a fresh graduate, whenever there was a problem within a department or within an organization, we used to go to the person involved in the department and have a face-to-face conversation, even though however tough it was, because our priority was to solve the problem. And our priority was to ensure that we have a long-lasting solution and not just treat the symptom. However, nowadays, when we work with organizations, when we do organizational visits as part of consultancy work, what we observe and hear is that even within the same organization department, everything is via an email or a WhatsApp chat or something of that nature. So when there's a customer problem, there will be accusations via email. And you would see about 25 messages or 30 messages and emails. But if you just go and speak to the person face to face, you could have probably solved that problem in less than a minute. Another example I can give is if you are within a department and you want to organize a department lunch or a dinner,
Sure.
it's much more easy to have a quick conversation and decide on the place. But if you start doing it via email or something like that, it may take a month of Sundays and you're still trying to decide where to go for lunch or dinner. So again, it comes to those social skills, which is very, very important. So just to cap off my response, it's about self-evaluation, really thinking about it from your perspective, and then thereafter looking at the soft skills, because if you are to be well regarded in society, it has to come not only in terms of a relationship perspective, but you need to earn the respect as well. And one way you can earn respect is by trying to be a good listener.
All right. So great listening skills is what I pivot from Dr. Nirmal De Silva's talk here. Khurram, if you could also shed some light on exactly the softer skills that people need to develop, and how do you ascertain whether you even have this skill?
Yeah. So the modern world would be full of intelligentsia coming from the inorganic world. We'll be having softwares. We already have, people are now getting scared that Google already know what they're thinking. The softwares are continuously listening. What do we want to buy? Why do we want to buy? Which color do I need? Where do I want to go? The solutions are already coming. So this tells me a very basic thing, that there is a high level competition in the field of intelligence. And since long, all the prophetic chats had been telling that intelligence is a very short term competitive skill for the mankind until a higher being in the field of intelligence doesn't take over. So what we're left with is something very important, and that is emotions. Let me quote something from the book of Mark Vernon, Big Question God. And the person asked, there is an atheist who asked the other person that, why are you praying? Why your daughter is running the marathon? And he said, I know the prayer doesn't work. But when she's running for the marathon, and if she looks back and take a look at her father, she would minimum see a man worried for her. That's prayer. So it creates a mutual bond between the mankind. We mankind have a fictive kinship developed on emotions because we all believe we get scared in dark. We don't like loud music. We fear death. We want to be happy. And all these words are like beads which join me with Dr. Nirmal, with someone in America, and across the globe. These beautiful, lovely feelings unite us and turns us into the one of the Plotinus. So, for me, what would be that one particular feeling? I think, I know you have that question later on queued up, if I'm right, but very first thing we all need to do is we need to know, who am I? That's the principal question. And until I don't know the answer to that question, I can never know you. If I don't know myself well as a human being, how can I know Dr. Nirmal well? So I would only be having an illusion of knowing Dr. Nirmal. So I have to remove all the biases, all the lenses, all these speculations related to me, and I should principally, quintessentially know who is Khurram before I address the question, who are you? And second thing, to me, as Dr. Nirmal said, is listening. For me, communicating as a human being would come up as something really, really important in the coming ages. And if you go to the Facebook or to the YouTube or all to the content market, you would see some extraordinary speakers making out wealth and becoming influencers just by how they communicate to the mankind. And that's the real difference, like how human being talk from heart to heart to the other. That's from my side.
Okay, so probably shedding some hormone relations as they stem from oxytocin and endorphins and serotonins being released in the system. We'll get to that, but we have a question here from Sarah Bill. She says, how can an employee work on his or her emotional intelligence at the workplace? So here's someone who probably works and wants to know, how can she develop this skill set? Khurram, if you want to take this.
I guess Dr. Saab, he's taking the lead so far. If you want, Dr. Nirmal, would you like to address? Then I could answer the same. Or,
Sure. So I think, Ali, so from that perspective, one of the tips that I can give is that you should never respond when you are angry. I think that's one of the most important tips. The second tip that I can give from a workplace perspective is that you need to listen in order to understand rather than trying to listen to respond, right? We mentioned the importance of communication and listening. But why is it important from organizational context is that more often than not, we feel that we are in a bit of a pressure situation, or we have been pushed to the deep end when there is a problem, and we feel that people want to judge us, or we feel that people are trying to put us in a difficult scenario to really see what we are made of. So from an organizational perspective, it's at times good to take a step back, look at the overall context of it, really try to understand why this particular problem has happened, or why a particular person has told you this scenario, and then take a brief moment to understand what are some of the options available for you to solve the problem, or what are some of the options available for you to respond. Remember, end of the day, what is important is to solve the problem. We need to be able to differentiate the problem with the person. More often than not, from organizational context, where it gets complicated is that we put far too much of emphasis on the person involved as opposed to the problem. And this is not an easy skill. Mind you, after years and years of working in the corporate world, it is one of the most toughest skills to really hone on. So it's important to, at any point of time, differentiate the problem with the person. Let me take a small example. If you are a person who's got a headache or who's been suffering from illness the previous day, you still might be suffering when you come to work. At that point of time, you might be not thinking straight, and you may do a mistake, or your Excel sheet might have some errors. At that point of time, if you just go on lashing out on the person and take it personally and say, you always make mistakes, I recruited you because I thought you were the best in the organization, but I made such a big mistake, it's not only putting the person down, but you're also not allowing that person to learn from that mistake, because there's such an emotional drain involved there. So the key thing is to differentiate the problem from the person, right? And to be more positive oriented. So mindset matters. As I always say, it's very easy to teach a person the skill, but it's extremely tough, if not impossible, to teach the people to have the right attitude.
wonderful.
You are primarily asked to dissect the person from the problem, but a lot of times the person is the problem. What do you do then?
That was for me. Okay.
No, Dr. Nirmal,
Again, I think I beg to differ on that, Ali. I think the person is not the problem, but the person is part of the circumstances involved. So,
all right.
Of course, a contributory factor, but we need to look at the context and the circumstances involved.
So probably figure out why someone is angry, or why someone is so frustrated or irritated at work. Okay, very well said, Dr. Nirmal. Khurram, over to you.
A quick answer. At the workplace, as Dr. Nirmal said, I think we need to, principally, as I answered earlier, we need to know ourselves. And when I walk into the workplace, and if I see someone angry, I need to know, is he angry specifically today, or he's like that? So after an experience, I would know that he's like that. Is he caught in the vicious circle of circumstances, bad economy, something's wrong with his wife, something, and I should respond to that thing and not to the particular way the person is behaving. That's very important. And I could never know that until I would not know myself as a human being, because until I don't know myself, how could I know you? But coming back again, And second is acknowledging the emotions of that person. Once you know that person is angry, then you would use the 10-second rule. Can you correct him in the 10 seconds? Yes or no? If you can correct him in 10 seconds, if he has lost a paper, if his ballpoint is lost, if the internet is not working and he's angry on it, if you can resolve that in 10 seconds to 1 minute, do respond, help him out. And if not, he's sitting frowning on something, then take a break, walk to him next day and talk with him, let him speak. And that's what the all Freudian psychology is about. You have to talk with the people to know what's happening in the black box. So principally, going back, whenever an emotion take place, you need to see, is the person like this every day, or this is an extraordinary situation. If this is an extraordinary situation, see, is it something which you can fix in 1 minute? Then jump into help there and then, or then respond. And if it is a long-term problem, then you would have to take up the Freudian hat, and you would have to help your colleague at the workplace out. As Dr. Nirmal said, that no person has ever taken birth as a bad soul. So you could easily decipher all those neurological layers in that person's mind, and you could see where is the problem, and you could help him fix that.
All right, we've had a wonderful discussion. We have some amazing questions coming in. One last question that I'd like to take before we call it a day is by Sarmad Iqbal. He says, what are the simple ways to understand self and others' emotions and to behave and act accordingly? Dr. Nirmal?
Yes. Again, from my perspective, I think it's good to start understanding yourself and speak to your peers, your loved ones, your friends, and really try to understand from them what they feel about you. Are they comfortable in terms of how you think and act and react? Because one part of it is self-awareness, but we shouldn't ever forget the importance or the challenges involved with ego. As humans, I think we are programmed in such a way that we don't like people criticizing or giving their feedback, even though it might be negative feedback. I'm a firm believer personally, and I'm trying my best every day to ensure that constructive criticism is something that I look forward to. It's more easier said than done, but that is one way that we can really understand what are some of our faults and how we can be better at handling our emotions. And if I take a cue of one of the things that my beloved wife always tells me is that at times it's much more easy to manage 500 people or 5,000 people, because you might be able to either philosophically or from a practical perspective have a one-size-fits-all approach. But it's far more tough to deal with 2 or 3 individuals in particular circumstances, because you need to spend more time in terms of understanding them and helping them. And I think those are wise words, and something that I've taken into heart over the last few years in order to understand and see. When I teach a student at university, every student matters, because end of the day, they're spending their time, they're sacrificing their time to learn something. And as an academic, I need to give them whatever knowledge possible in the most practical way. And then when we run organizations, everybody that we have in the organization, irrespective of which level they are in, we need to be an inspiration. And one of the ways that we can inspire them is to lead from the front and to create some type of benchmark or an image for them to follow. So I think these are some of the ways, whether it's in academics or whether it's in the corporate world, you can be a better version.
Khurram, we'll take your take on it as well.
Because the person has asked the question quite clinically, and Dr. Saab has shed light quite beautifully over it. So how can we know ourselves more simply? The problem with the modern man is that our existential crisis is very different. The market economy has defined me already. How should I look? What car should I buy? Which watch should I wear? Which phone should I carry? to be a better, acceptable human being in the society. So that leaves no chance for me to know who is Khurram, rather than I'm complying to all those standards which are set out there. The very first answer is, until you're not counting yourself, you can never know yourself in the community. As beautifully said by Buddha, that there was a woman crying and crying like anything because she lost her beautiful necklace which she was wearing. So after they were trying to find it and they were roaming around in the whole kingdom, one of the person said that, "Oh my lady, the necklace is in your neck." And she started smiling. And there was the Buddha passing, and he said, "Why were you crying?" "Because the necklace was never lost." "And why are you happy? You just never found it." It's already there. The answer is so already there. If you can know about the black holes, would it be more of a trouble knowing about your own self? The way we invest madly on our academic, to improve ourselves academically, we have never tried to improve or acknowledge ourselves spiritually. Would you? I personally, Khurram, drive 45 minutes to my office and I come back 45 minutes back. I need to drive 45 minutes back from work to office. But I might not give 1 hour and few minutes every day to sit with Khurram and to see who is Khurram, who is going through and experiencing all those pains, suffering, and all those extraordinary circumstances of life. So until you not pause up your life for a day, 2 or 5 days, the fast moving capitalistic world outside would never let you have a sharp look of your own self. And how beautifully said in the book Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, in his dystopian society, you cannot drive slow. And the person asked to the cop, "Why can't I drive slow?" He said, "If you drive slow, you would know that the orange line you see out of the car window is not a line, it's a flower. And we don't want you to see the flower." And as Dr. Nirmal said, it's so easy to manage 5,000 boats, 5,000 tables, and 5,000 standardized human beings. But you might need a whole new life to tell a kid that you can't have the rainbow tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, both Dr. Nirmal De Silva, for joining us from all the way from Sri Lanka, and Mr. Khurram Ellahi. Thank you very, very much for both of your inputs on this amazing topic. This is Ali Saeed from Greenwich University, signing out. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.